Okay, recording started. Welcome to the Transforming Assessment webinar series. This is the 30th of April. Today's session is on authentic interactive online oral assessments. And the argument is that perhaps this is an exam replacement. And our speakers today are Danielle, Popi and Ray from Griffith University in Queensland, Australia. So would whoever is going to start like to start, please?
Thank you very much, Matthew. Hello, everyone. My name's Danielle Logan, and I am a learning and teaching consultant with the Griffith Business School at Griffith University on the Gold Coast in sunny Queensland. And I welcome you all along to this session. It's fabulous to see so many of you here this evening. Today and tonight, we're going to be talking about rethinking your invigilated exams and how we might do that through interactive oral assessments. We're going to be recording, so I've popped this slide in to say hello to anyone who perhaps is joining us just through the recording to this session. Now, I'll be presenting the session. I'm very grateful to have two of my colleagues along with me this evening. We have Associate Professor Popi Sotiriadou, who will be talking about her experience as a convener using this assessment design. And in the chat, we welcome Ray Jobst, who's an educational designer with us here at Griffith. She'll be doing a fabulous job of moderating the chat and will also be jumping on to assist with some of the questions. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I thank you all for joining us. So in the chat, as Ray moderates, please, she'll be directing questions to us. I've got a few places where we'll pause and have a little bit of a discussion based on the chat, and Ray will collect some of the questions to do that at various points through the presentation. So please do bring your questions, and I'm sure afterwards as well we can stay around and there'll be an opportunity to have a chat as we did in the session last night, which was just fabulous. As well. Okay, so what is an interactive oral? I always think that's a great place to start. We define, I suppose, an interactive oral as a genuine and unscripted interaction between a student and other students, or a student and an examiner. It gives students an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge verbally in an authentic setting representative of a workplace environment or a scenario. Now, interactive orals are not Viva Voce exams. I can hear you all thinking to yourselves now, hang on, we're just talking about a Viva Voce exam. And indeed, last night's session, Phil was talking about Vivas as being a fabulous option for dealing with contract cheating. Yes, Vivas are oral assessments as well, but the traditional Viva is very much one way, almost. You know, essentially students are asked questions and they just have to sit there and respond. And I did a little search not so long ago on Google Scholar there, and I put in Viva Voce exams and the word stressful, and I had over 8,000 returns. Now, there is a great deal of stress associated with Viva Voce exams, and I'm very aware of that and the impact of that on students. So what we've looked to do with this assessment is literally make it a conversation where students can demonstrate that knowledge verbally and in an unscripted way, in a genuine way, in an authentic way. And that's what's important in the difference here. The International Baccalaureate have used interactive orals in their assessments for quite some time. And I think that, you know, we've built on that, brought that into the higher ed space there. So interactive orals are engaging, they're authentic, they develop skills and enhance employability prospects, and they also ensure very high standards of academic integrity. So why would we use interactive orals? They're scalable. Now, I've seen a lot of questions recently about the scalability of interactive orals, and we can discuss that a little bit more later, but we've tested it at scale up to sort of 400 odd students, and that would just continue to multiply. We have a process in place, and it's quite easy to design and easy to manage. We can offer them and have offered them synchronously or asynchronously, online and or face-to-face. They are invigilated essentially when they're synchronous, and they're just as engaging for the students as they are for the assessors. Many of my conveners who've worked with interactive orals, and we have currently 14 courses just in the business school alone using interactive oral designs as a part of their assessment in their courses. They tell me that this is the most enjoyable assessment that they've done. That's the most enjoyable time for marking that they've had, and I think that's a huge win as well. So the work that we've been doing in this space has been over the last 5 years. So this is not something new that we've pulled together as a COVID response, although it really does apply to the COVID situation beautifully. This is some work that we've been doing for quite a number of years now, since 2015, 2016, and that research, that study, those surveys that we've done across the cohorts has allowed us to put together a model for design. And it's based on 6 characteristics. And what we found is that if in designing assessments, if they are scaffolded, so interactive orals are a part of a scaffolded assessment that is supported by resources, exemplars, rubrics, things like that, that they're scenario based, that they're aligned to the program. And in our business school, we have accreditation that we have to meet. So many of our interactive orals also collect data for assurance of learning purposes. If the designs meet the learning outcomes, obviously, of the course, that they're accessible and equitable and professionally focused, then we find that we always achieve 3 things. We achieve really high student engagement. There's very clear links to employability, and the students tell us this. And also we have extremely high academic integrity. You can see our paper there for more information on that. So how have we collected this data over the years? This is a handful of courses that have been designed. As I said, there's 14 in all told, but you can see that some of the courses here are actually have collected data across multiple cohorts. Some are in their first or second cohort, but we actually have one course here, and it's Popi's course that she'll talk to you about later, that's in their 3rd cohort. We have cohorts that have collected or be surveyed on their experience with interactive orals, and it's all been very, very positive there. So I'm just going to pause here and ask Ray, are there any questions that you'd like to bring forward at the moment?
Just a few, and I've shared the link to the SWAY in the chat, and Matthew's shared the link to the slides. There's questions around the large cohorts and whether it's one-to-one. So I know your examples will go into some of that.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks, Ray. Large cohorts work through good administration, and if you have a look at the SWAY resource that we've created and shared, you'll see towards the bottom there's some resources there on some of the technologies that we're using to do that. Many of our interactive orals are one-to-one, but there are some wonderful group designs too. So what I might do is just segue then straight into having a good look at how we apply some of these principles and characteristics to our design. And what I have here is a list of a lot of the business designs, and you'll forgive me, obviously I work in the business area here, but as I talk about these designs, I'd love you to go on a journey and think about your own disciplines, because what I'm hoping will happen in the chat is that some of you will start talking about applications to various other disciplines in the medical field, and certainly in the sciences and beyond. And what I'd love to do is start to hear some of the questions you might have about designs and how we could scaffold and build. So the first one I'm going to bring to your attention here, and this will be a series of 4 vignettes that we'll do, is a lovely design we have here in a capstone course. Now this particular course is in our, it's a capstone of hotel management. That we have, and in this course students work in groups across an entire semester to run the service operation of a hotel. Now it's a scenario based operation. They have to make decisions. Each student is responsible for a different area, service operations area of the hotel, and their final assessment brings them together in a mock shareholders meeting where they need to stand up with their group and they need to defend the decisions that they've made right throughout the semester. In this case, it's a 30-minute oral, and it's worth around about 35%. So if we have a look here at the design, you can see that it's the final design. They have an early test, they have an executive committee meeting. So we go into, once they've got the content there, they go into the scenario, there's an executive committee meeting, and then they have a balanced scorecard that they put forward, and then they have to attend this annual shareholders meeting. So you'll see here that it asks students to defend the decisions that they particularly made, that it's authentic, it's linked very much to their employability, it's the highest level of academic integrity here, and it assists with moderation. So absolutely, these assessments, as you'll see, are equally applicable to all subjects, STEM and humanities subjects, including large cohorts. We can look at some other along these lines as well as we go. So let's have a look then at one of our numeracy-based courses. So in fact, a suite of them. Our colleagues in economics came to me and said, you know what, it's very important for our economics or our future economists to be able to speak, to be able to verbally convey their knowledge across many different areas. So in this particular major in our Bachelor's of Business degree, we have a first year, second year and third year course across the major, all having interactive orals as a part of their assessments, but they're going to focus on different aspects of communication and develop those skills. So in this instance, there is a lot of data that they have to crunch. There's a lot of calculations that they make, but they need to still be able to communicate that. A first year course, quite simply, students, the assessment scenario there is that they are needing to communicate with a friend or a family member, and basically they need to reteach a concept. So in this instance, a member of the family has got the wrong end of the fiscal policy ahead of a major election, and students are asked to reteach that concept and explain it and demonstrate that. And that might be on a piece of paper on the table, it might be on a whiteboard on the screen, but that's there are multiple questions along those lines in that first year course. In the second year course, we're asking those students to communicate via the media to the public. And so they're going to be asked some pretty curly questions by the media there. They're going to need to then take some very strong economic language skills and rephrase that to be able to communicate to a generalist audience. And that's a particular skill that was identified there for our students. And then in third year, we're looking at communicating with the government private sector, where whilst you will use your economic language, you will also have to tailor it for a particular audience that is perhaps a little bit more experienced in the area. In each instance, they are the final assessment in these courses, and it's a logical sequence of arguments we're looking for: coherent responses, relation to theory, current examples, economic vocabulary, and again, this is very authentic, linked to employability, highest levels of academic integrity there, and it's scaffolded to previous assessments. So I can see a question that's come up here from Ray. Do articulate bamboozlers get an unfair advantage? No, they don't. And how we do that is we use high quality rubrics. We spend quite a bit of time working with the academics on the development of a marking rubric. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about those as we go along. So our next vignette looks at a first year course. Now, in this particular first year course, this is not a final assessment. This convener is actually asking students to participate in an interactive oral as their very first assessment, their early piece of assessment in first year. This would be a course that students would do in their very first semester at university. And within the first few weeks, they're going to have to submit a draft for a written assignment. And then they're going to need to come and meet with the convener or the tutor in this instance, and communicate how the economic models that they used could be used in analysis for the research for their paper. So it's demonstrating their knowledge. It also gives the academic an opportunity to scaffold their understanding, perhaps correct a few things as they go along. It's a low weight assessment in this instance, but it's a wonderful opportunity to reach out and really connect with those first year students. So it's a big part of the retention opportunity there for these students. Again, it supports the preparation of the first draft. It's reteaching theories, which we know is a very sound way of asking, making sure that they understand what they're talking about. And again, it ticks all the various boxes. And our final vignette here is a second-year sport management course. And this is a course that we have, as I pointed out earlier, run an interactive oral in for a number of years, and we're very privileged tonight to have Associate Professor Popi Sotiriadou with us. And I'm going to hand over to her now, and she can explain a little bit more about her design.
Thanks, Danny, and hi everyone. The what of my story takes me back to 2016, when in my capacity as the discipline leader for sport management and a convener to a new course, I introduced a suite of 3 scaffolded authentic assessments that led to an interactive oral, which was a job interview. And as Danny alluded to, you can see more details on assessment design on the link to the article All This Way. The reasons why this came about and some background to the design challenges I encountered had to do with first the fact that due to a degree restructure, the course Sport Management Principles, which was a first-year course, became a second-year course. The convener left and the course was handed to me. With that came 2 learning objectives, and we had to collect data for assurance of learning that year and for our reaccreditation with AACSB. The assessments were definitely not industry relevant. They would not help achieve the learning objectives. And at the same time, buzzwords like employability, skill development, retention, engagement were all becoming key strategic priorities at Griffith. So I set out to designing something that would be of value to students, something that would reflect my teaching philosophy, and I could sell it to them as unique with relevance to the workplace, their careers, and the industry. As an added challenge, I also knew from student evaluations that they had 0 interest or engagement with the course, and the attendance was really poor. Moving on to how this worked, a lot of it hinged back then on sell, sell, sell. This was a novel idea, and I had to sell this from week 1. See, one of the first and perhaps the only thing that students want to know is, what do I have to do in this course to pass? So explaining the assessments and selling it to them was crucial, because this was nothing they've done before, and I knew I needed them on board. So I positioned it as developing their employability, enhancing their experience from the very first class. I had to explain it carefully, repeatedly, and told them how they would not just pass. They will excel because they will engage and they will enjoy it. And when they enjoy things, they do well. Supporting them clearly was very important, and I knew I had to help them to excel. I had to prepare them, to offer them enough resources. And I did. And they became co-creators and collaborators in this. They spoke to me about their needs, and we worked as a team. From a convener's perspective, I can assure you that the resources were a lot of fun to prepare. And yes, I did have Danny's help, but I enjoyed it, and it wasn't onerous. I remember recording a mock job interview with Danny, where she was the interviewer and I was the job applicant, the student. So in class, I gave students the rubric and the marking criteria. I played the video for them to mark me. I can tell you they crucified me, but this practice alone was useful for them to reflect on how to best prepare for their interactive oral and how they will be assessed. Now, clearly I have an accent, and my accent was an interesting twist, a turning point. Students raised it as a potential issue, and it became clear to them that having an accent or being an international student, which we have lots, had zero impact on their mark. And needless to say, how this alone took so much pressure off our international cohort. In all this, I could not hide my excitement. I still remember walking in the first lecture, sharing my passion about the assignments, how the students could do so well, how they could choose their own organization, they can relate it to the future careers, the successes, the development. And you know what? They were just as excited about it too. I sold it so well because I believed in it, and so did they. And it was truly a unique experience for all. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit now about the impact or the influence that this one innovation alone has had a tremendous ripple effect on so many levels, students, courses, degrees, other colleagues, and literally paved the way to such a shift in adapting a transformative paradigm. First, I wish to start with the impact to university policy and student access and equity. I won't stay here because I know Dani will expand on this as she was pivotal on the policy modification. But the second point here and positive outcome that I want to stress is that after that one course, in my capacity as the discipline leader, I took the whole discipline on this ride and led the review of the whole major. And we ditched all the exams. Our undergraduate event management degree followed suit. And then other much larger business courses were revamped on the same premise. Then I took the role of the program director for Bachelor of Business Innovation, where again, we introduced interactive orals. And while this was all happening, colleagues from Griffith and other universities, nationally and internationally, were reaching out interested, genuinely interested. And that kept spreading beautifully because it ticks all the boxes. Third, that continuous testing and exploring and expression of interest from the academic world led to trials and the legacy of this work, which is the designing framework and the 6 principles that Dani spoke about a minute ago. Fourth, disseminating our work was and openly sharing it, the applications of the framework and the resources that we developed, conferences, seminars, webinars, and so forth, led to tangible artifacts that we can now share with colleagues and say, here, this is a simple guide that we have used and tested, and it's proof that works every single time, be it small or big courses, online or face-to-face, synchronous or asynchronous, management, marketing, finance, sport, events, it works. Besides being scalable and adaptable, it's also sustainable. So I have now other people teaching those courses, and I can tell you that the resources I have are so self-explanatory that I don't have to do anything. They just run with it. Fifth point here is the strength of all this resonates on the fact that it's all evidence-based. We think it works, we know it. Plus, collecting data has over time helped us refine our work, publish it, attract more funding, and so forth. Last but certainly not least, our data consistently shows the positive impact that the shift of paradigm to offering transformative assessments has on student performance, success, and so forth. So I want to tell you in closing, this is my last slide, and I want to tell you a little bit about the some of the quads of the key things that emerged out of our experiences, student experiences with interactive orals. First, their views on interactive orals literally any definition of authentic assessment. Second, specificity. This was a huge finding linking interactive orals to deterring academic misconduct or students shopping around for assessments online. Third, scaffolding was a key design aspect in terms of not throwing students to the deep and offer support and resources and building the capacity to deliver complex tasks. Fourth, huge turnaround with student enjoyment and engagement with the course and the assessment task. Yes, assessment tasks can be, and they can enjoy doing them. And last, uniqueness. This finding was music to my ears, to hear that my students felt special not just a number, that a personalized approach and being able to tap into the area of their own interest, they owned their work. The uniqueness and personalized approach to interactive orals allowed for was a huge success from a student experience perspective. In closing, I hope I have painted the picture of how interactive orals have colored my courses and added value to my career as an academic. Innovation comes with big challenges, no doubt, but bigger rewards too. And I'm here to tell you to feel safe to use interactive orals. Take the risk. I can reassure you it's worthwhile. But a word of caution, don't do this because you have to. If your heart's not in it, you won't be able to deliver it. You can't sell it. Interactive oral assessment have truly been one of the most rewarding experiences in my career from an educator perspective. And on that note, I hope sharing my experiences was somewhat helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Popi. And now I can see there's been a lot of chat there. I'd like to invite Ray to bring a few questions forward, if that's okay, please.
There has been so much discussion in the chat there, Danielle, and I think you've responded to some of the questions. So some of the early questions were around the disciplines that could use this, for example, STEM and humanities. And that was from Peter, but I think you mentioned that the discussion around the articulate bamboozlers got quite involved there in terms of being able to detect fakers, and there was Cam posed a really good question. How do you minimize likability biases in these charming, outspoken students getting the benefit over anxious introverts?
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And I think Poppy spoke to that a little bit there with the activity that we do. I need to explain, and Poppy did share there, that in every single case that we have, I work with the convener to create some exemplars, and they're not perfect exemplars. They're exemplars that the academics do that will have some mistakes in it, that they'll stutter through. If you have a look in the sway, there's a document linked in there, a little 3-page document, and embedded in that are some links to an exemplar, a briefing, also a briefing video, and also a rubric for one of our economics courses there. And that course is taken by Professor Fabrizio Carmignani, and he has done some excellent work there with the students. And in his responses, there are deliberate errors in his exemplar there. And he's got also, as with Poppy, a very strong accent there. And so what we do when we put that rubric up with the students as a tutorial exercise there is we ask them to mark the conveners. Now, as Poppy said, in almost every instance, not just her courses, but in all our courses, the students are absolutely they're so harsh on our conveners on that rubric. But the interesting thing is that what we're assessing, and we'll have a look at this in a bit more detail later, what we're assessing is the quality of the content of what they say, not at all on that rubric really, apart from perhaps one criterion there on flow. Are we looking at the quality of the flow or their expression or their English? And once we do that, and the convener and the tutors work with the students to mark the video, essentially exemplar, on that rubric and discuss where it would sit and why, the students really come to understand, and all students, and that's students that have anxiety issues, that's students with English as second language, students really get to understand that what we're looking for here is the quality behind their answers, and that will come with time in terms of how their expression develops. So that is something that we have deliberately built in. We've been very aware of, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the stress that viva voces can cause. And what we don't see greatly in our feedback from students, particularly where it's well scaffolded, constantly discussed, that there's lots of activities there, perhaps voice discussion boards and things for the students throughout the course, we see the students really develop their skills. So by the time the interactive oral comes along, it's not plonked on the end of it just on its own. It's scaffolded all the skills to be able to do this. The students are ready for it. And, you know, through a lot of our research there, our students tell us that not only can't they cheat, they don't want to cheat because they're ready for this. It's the next step, and they know they need these skills for employability. Now, in saying all of this as well, we do have multiple alternate assessment designs for interactive orals that we've used. Some of them are asynchronous, so that might be something you could look at. The cohort might be examined synchronously, might have some students that need to perhaps adaptive release questions and respond with a longer time frame, and perhaps not respond in front of you, perhaps be able to video their recordings and submit that. There's all sorts of different ways of doing in-kind assessment here. Does that answer the question there, Ray?
Yes, I think so, and I think a lot of the questions really centre on 4 things: how you manage large cohorts, and I know you're going to be talking about that. The synchronous, asynchronous, which you just mentioned, the weighting of assessment, including, you know, the small time, large weight, sort of relatively large weight, say 40%. I noticed Lorraine mentioned it takes a lot of learning but not a lot of time to land a plane, so I thought that was very clever. And inclusion and reasonable accommodation for students with a disability.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we've certainly just talked about the last one there. Weighting is something I'd like to discuss, though, because I hear that a lot. There's some organisations or some universities I've been speaking with. I've been doing a few sessions with people in various institutions, and please let me know if you would like me to come and talk more to your group at some point. What I've been doing is really looking at that percentage, and a lot of institutions have very clear articulated, you know, 4,000 words equals this percentage and things like that. What we've found with interactive orals, and they're usually around about 10 minutes in length, 10 to 15 minutes seems to be the average, is that if the questions are well crafted, if they're looking at higher order thinking, if they're really synthesizing the students' knowledge and perhaps defending something they've done previously, you can elicit a response from the students that is in the vicinity of the quality you'd expect in a 4,000 word assignment. So it's incredibly efficient way to assess your students. And so the weighting really depends on what you're doing. So, you know, here we're looking at some pretty weighty stuff here for the economists. You know, they're sort of sitting up there around about the 30% mark. But as we spoke about in the first year course, where they're really just discussing their ability to apply analysis models to some data in some preliminary research there, it's an early assessment and it's weighted at 10%. It's still around about 10 minutes long, but what we're asking of the students in that time frame is really quite different. And I think that's where the discussion needs to be had in your institution. For us in business, it's a little bit more flexible. But what all of these assessments have gone in front of what we call closing the loop boards, where for us in our assurance of learning process for accreditation, these assessments need to be and the outcomes are discussed every semester that these courses run, and we look at comparative analysis there to previous cohorts. And these assessments have been commended time and time again for being such an efficient way of examining the students, and also that the students are really demonstrating growth then as they pass through their years. So it's been really interesting there. I see a question here about consistency. Are the questions given to the students all the same? So no, they're not. And it's not it's not a viva voce where we develop a pool of questions. Most of these designs require a defense of something previous that they've submitted. So the questions at the time of marking of the previous assignment are often noted. We set up a little bit of a table for the cohort, and as the tutors are marking those previous assessments, they're asked to include 2 or 3 or 4 questions that they might like to ask those students in their interactive orals at the end of semester that draw on their knowledge and perhaps synthesize it further there. So those questions are then, when in that particular design, they can be moderated ahead of time. But the idea is that questions aren't the same, that this is a conversation. It's an unscripted conversation. So maybe the first question to the student in the scenario, and it might be a scenario where, you know, they've submitted a report to a manager or a CEO or a client, and then they have to defend that. The conversation is then unscripted from there, but it is all about the assessor probing the knowledge of the student, and we tend to hear that time passes incredibly quickly, and I've been around a number of rooms when students are coming out over the years, and they're all just so positive. Oh my goodness, that was so fun. I actually really enjoyed that. Can I do it again? We hear some really interesting things, and the students are quite surprised that they're saying them too. So it's really quite positive in that way. Any other questions there, Ray?
Bonnie's just posed one. You mentioned that group interactive oral assists with moderation. Can you say more about that?
Absolutely. So if we go back to that example that I gave in that vignette there about the group interactive oral that we did in the hospitality course, this is a group that had been thrown together and had to work together, a group of 3 or 4 students for an entire semester. And there was real issues with this course with social loafing and very big concerns over a number of years as to how on earth you moderate that, and there were complaints and all sorts of things going on. And we tried lots of different tools to deal with this, but the introduction of the interactive oral stopped all those problems. They knew it was coming at the end, and they knew that if they actually didn't do the work all along, they may be able to put something in their balanced scorecard there and blow themselves up as being particularly wonderful. But the minute they get in front of that shareholders meeting where they're being peppered with questions, it's very, very clear straight away those students who know what they're talking about and those who don't, those who actually did make those decisions and those who, others in the group who perhaps carried them. And so it really works well for group moderation. And in this instance here, you'll see that the submission for the balanced scorecard and the submission date for the presentation are very close to each other. So in actual fact, the students are alerted to the fact that this final assessment will also be used to moderate what they've submitted there on their scorecard as to their performance. Question there, how does the performance of other group members impact on the individual performance? It really comes down to you. As I mentioned here, you're in this interactive oral, whilst it's done as a group, it's marked individually, and it's based on you defending the decisions that you made, and you will be asked questions according to that.
There was a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, about recorded there. I can see from Melanie. Are orals recorded for moderation in the case of student appeal? Absolutely. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Collaborate Ultra is what we use. And we use that for both face-to-face and online because we can have it running in the room. The students are notified that it's being recorded, and we retain it then in the course site for moderation and also for appeals purposes. But I can say we haven't had any of those problems in terms of appeals coming through. Students feel that they prepare well for these, they do their best on the day, and generally speaking, there's nothing unfair about this. They have every opportunity to do as well as they choose to do in this sort of assessment.
Just another couple of quick questions. I know you'll be covering the synchronous and asynchronous sort of examples later, and there was also a question around involving external people, like people from industry, whether there's been any work or examples of that.
Yes, absolutely. There is a design in a master's course for one of our areas that has been drafted. It's not running yet, but it's where students actually have to create do an analysis for a local business, create a virtual tour for them, mark it up, look at how they can improve it, and present that to the client. And it's actually a real client, and so that client's able to look over those beforehand, and then they can come in and respond to questions there. That's a smaller cohort, but absolutely that's a fabulous design that we can do. Now, asynchronous and synchronous design is a little different. In some instances, we actually use asynchronous to support our students who are not, for whatever reason, able to do synchronous. And certainly we had that at the beginning of the COVID situation where we had some students who we have a third trimester. We run in trimesters, and we have a third trimester over the Christmas period there, and a number of our students who were studying in a government business relations course went home to China for Lunar New Year there and couldn't get back, and so they also didn't have the ability to get online and do the assessment synchronously. And so we have some alternate designs that we did where, we use the adaptive release questions. They did upload videos and then submit links. We had a couple of students in that instance actually who didn't have the network even to upload the videos where they were, and so our dean gave an alternate approval there that they could actually do it in a particular time frame in a written form. But again, because it was scaffolding a previous assessment, the questions were particular to the students, and we had no concerns about contract cheating there, because if they hadn't, all of their questions were actually related to defence of a previous assessment there, so they really had to respond to that themselves. Any other questions there at this point?
No, I think Poppy's just responded. There's been some discussion, and quite a few people have raised this about those people who might be nervous and anxious at the time. But yeah, I think you've mentioned a few strategies, the videos and discussions in tutorials practice, and Poppy's also responded in the chat. Sell. I love that, Poppy.
It is about the sell. It's about talking to the students as often as you can and at every level, and getting them to participate that way. Look, we use Teams in our courses extensively here at Griffith, and simple things like putting up a comment that students a thought for the day, or getting them to look around them and find examples of things, rather than responding in a chat by written form, asking them to actually video themselves giving their comment verbally and uploading that into the chat works really, really well too. There's so many ways to combat shyness, and when it's a part of the assessment, students know that as when they take the course, when they come on board, and it's when we first started, obviously we had sort of 1 or 2 courses, and it was a real concern for our dean as to how that would play out, but the students themselves told us they loved it. They understand that they need to communicate verbally well to be employable, and so developing those skills, acknowledging perhaps, and I've heard stories of the odd student who's been quite distressed and upset, but once they're calmed down, once they give it a go, perhaps they come back for a second time, a little bit of understanding there, or in some instances they actually ask to do it in a different setting or at a slightly different time. We've found that all students have come back to us and they've just been so positive. So I hear the concerns there, but it really does work well. One other I just want to touch on really quickly is workload. Someone brought up workload. I just need to say that interactive orals in our business school, or all assessments in our business school, academics have 45 minutes per student per semester for marking, and that's it. And so our designs, the scaffolded designs that you're seeing, have to fit within the 45 minutes of marking. So an interactive oral that is 10 minutes long, we have we schedule them every 15 minutes and there's 5 minutes there for marking, but the rubrics are so strong and so descriptive that we find that, and because they use those rubrics online, that they're actually able to give their feedback comprehensively in that period before the next student comes in. And so our conveners and our tutors tell us that they're just not onerous, and I think Popi mentioned that before as well. Okay, yes, I will show you a rubric example, and actually you'll find them in the SWAY as well. But what I might do now is just move on to some of the logistics and policies, because for a number of you that are here today, you will find that you perhaps don't necessarily have policies in place straight away to be able to do these, but many of you will. So here's what to look for, and here's what we did. So at our university, interactive orals have been approved at the highest level. Now, when we first wanted to do these, we didn't have policy in place that would enable them to happen. Certainly, there were a number of things we had to look at there. In the first instance, now our interactive orals may be held in the final exam period when there isn't any other final assessment in the course, and they are actually a school-based assessment. Now, what that means is that you have to set it up and run it yourself in the exam period. So we use, as I said, we use Collaborate Ultra for recording the assessments. And we use the Microsoft 365 Bookings app, which is a fabulous app that allows you to set up booking sheets for each tutor on the days and at the times they want to have it, so it can be all different. And those each of those booking sheets has a unique link, and the students use that unique link to book a time that doesn't clash with any other assessment that they have, works with their part-time work, all those sorts of things. And they do that usually in their second last week of teaching, and we actually usually do it as a workshop activity, so everyone gets released, they get the link, and in the workshop they'll actually just go through and book their time and have a little look at their timetable there. My advice to you though is do not book too early. Students' lives are very complex, and when they're doing this, if they book too early before perhaps the timetable for exams is set too firmly, or before they have their work rosters, you'll find that students will want to change their times. And that's something that the Bookings app does allow up to, you can say up to what period. We usually allow them to do their times if they need to up to 24 hours beforehand. And we usually also build into the exam time a little bit of a buffer at the end of each day, so that if there are any issues, students can come back at a later time and drop in there. So there's multiple solutions depending on the cohort size as to how you can schedule that, but that's how we're doing it at the moment, up to certainly 400 plus has worked really well there. Now, policy considerations in terms of academic integrity. This is where, when we first wanted to do interactive orals, we couldn't do them because we didn't have an assessment policy that required the provision of student ID for our online students, and unfortunately our enrolment procedures did not require students to submit a photographic ID, or certainly if they did, they weren't able to store them anywhere. So we had assessment policy amended quite quickly, and thankfully that is now in place, where students actually do have to provide their student ID. And what we do with that is we say, all right, we'll scan it or take a photo of it and upload it just to a submission point. We use Blackboard as our LMS at Griffith, and they upload it there by the end of the first week of the course. Because what we find with contract cheating, and I have to be a bit careful here because there may be people amongst us here who are perhaps interested in this area. I learnt that from Phil last night, so I'll be a little careful here. But in this instance, what we find is that it would be very difficult and expensive to try and hire someone to work double, I suppose, and do the assessment for them when they're asked to provide ID in week 1, but the exam is not until sort of week 13 or 14 to have that same person. So that's worked very well for us. Students tell us that they really can't cheat in terms of academic integrity, because that's an actual quote there from a student. I can't cheat, I don't have a twin. And so we find that this works very well for our students in terms of ensuring that they're there. For our students who are enrolled on campus, we do have their IDs in an online area, and that's accessible to the primary convener, not to the tutors, unfortunately. So in this instance, we ask the primary convener to provide the tutors with a printed list of class photos so that they double check their IDs, both online and face-to-face when they come in. But as we do this, the onus is very much on the students to book. There are very clear instructions that we put in our course site. There are the provision of briefing videos and exemplars, as I mentioned, and also the rubric. So we really do make sure that the students are very aware of what's happening from the beginning of the course all the way through to when they actually have to do it. So technologies. For us, we use a number of things. As I mentioned, Blackboard is our LMS. We call it Learning at Griffith. And in the business school, we're very fortunate. We have a bespoke tool for assurance of learning purposes for data collection. And that allows us, you can't submit into ALEC, but you can mark in ALEC, and it marks on a rubric. It has a wonderful rubric database, so you can build your rubrics and share and look at others from that tool. Once you've built a rubric, you and all your tutoring staff can mark on that rubric, and it does then convert into graphic data for us to use for our assurance of learning purposes for accreditation. So we use that, but don't despair if you don't have something like that. Certainly in Blackboard as an LMS, and in Moodle too, I know you can have rubrics there, and certainly in Blackboard we just attach a rubric to a column in the Mark Centre, and the academics are able to mark on that online as they go, and they just have that open in a separate window. Again, we use the Bookings app. We create a calendar for each tutor. So they have their own particular link, and we record in Collaborate Ultra. Now, we were talking before about alternate assessments in kind, and this is where I'd like to draw your attention to two of the tools that we use particularly here. VoiceThread is one that we've used for a number of years. It's a voice discussion board, and you'll find in the sway that there's some slides there towards the bottom of the sway that will show you how to use VoiceThread to assess interactive oral assessments and how to set that up. The other tool that we've been using in the Griffith Business School and more widely at Griffith is Feedback Fruits, and I know I'm very fortunate today. I saw on the list that there are 4 of our colleagues from Feedback Fruits who've joined us today, and they might like to jump in the chat now. Feedback Fruits at the moment is very useful for asynchronous also assessments there. And could be used as alternate assessments as well for both individuals and for group students. As I mentioned before, yes, there's Max in the chat and Annika as well. If you have any questions about how you can use Feedback Fruits there for asynchronous assessments, they'll certainly be able to talk to you. Adaptive release of questions, uploading the link to responses. This was what I was talking to you before about that course where the students were initially caught in Wuhan, and this was what we put in place very quickly. We had, I think, around about 4 days to put this in place for those students, and that worked really, really well, apart from the 2 that I mentioned that couldn't in their particular neighbourhood, and that's where we had responses as well. So we've always had a number of alternate assessments here, and they're approved ahead of time, so as a part of the assessment. So yes, it may be a synchronous interactive oral, but if need be for students that may have special needs in that area, any of these can be invoked, and they're all well understood and well documented. So this table has been quite popular in some of the sessions that I've done, and I'm keen to show it with you because it shows invigilated exam alternatives and also non-invigilated exam alternatives and what you might do. And as you think about what you've heard today, and tonight, you'll see synchronous and asynchronous interactive orals really do sit quite well there as options for invigilated exams, particularly in the current situation. I'm sure we've all been having those conversations with our institutions, and they've proved really popular, certainly in our, not just Griffith Business School, but now right across Griffith. So the question earlier about, STEM versus humanities subjects, I've been meeting with sports sciences at Federation Uni, actually. We had a lovely conversation recently. I've spoken to academics in nursing today. I was speaking to academics in some of the science areas. I had an engineering academic contact me yesterday with queries about how he was going to do what he was going to do. But at all points, interactive orals or verbal communication is so important. At some point you're going to talk to a client, or at some point you're going to need to explain what it is that you're doing in your research, or what it is that you're doing in your various fields there, or communicate with a client or a patient or something along those lines. So this is where really you're only limited by your creativity, and it's an area I have loved looking in for the last 5 years, because every time I meet with the convener, there's a little twinkle in my eye, and I get so excited at the thought of how looking at their assessment plan with them and considering how we can make it richer, and how we can really positively impact the students and their experience. And we certainly see that cohort after cohort, the students do better coming in. They're certainly more aware of it, and the skills are improving as well. So yes, a synchronous interactive oral is invigilated, but it can also be non-invigilated if the video is not turned on. If it's simply audio only, it really depends on the ability to ensure that the student is the student, and it depends on your system at that point. Okay, potential issues. Now, I've got to be honest and say, call the elephant in the room. We all know technology is an issue, particularly for online exams, and it does cause some concern for the students and for the examiners both. Much as this session here, what would happen if both parties couldn't be heard clearly? What would happen if one of us had to turn off our video, or both of us had to turn off our video? How do we deal with that? Well, ideally, obviously the examiner doesn't need their video at all, so long as the student puts their video on long enough to show you their student ID, even if it's without audio initially, and then they speak to you so that you understand that that's them. If you have any concerns about their voice changing, or doubts at all, you can certainly ask them to return for a second. You can follow your academic integrity path there. The other point here to consider is space. Now, what we find is, because we ask students to book around about the second last week of the semester ahead of their exam, so that might be 3 weeks ahead, they've got time to talk to their housemates, they've got time to organise with the family, not to be streaming online, and find a place free from noise disruptions to be able to undertake the exam, particularly when it's only 10-15 minutes long. It's really not a problem there. And timing. As with any online assessment, the issue of timing is really important, and time zones, and particularly at the moment. So making sure that on your booking calendars you offer a range of times so that it is equitable and accessible to all of your students is really important there. I can see in the chat there was a question about branching, that's certainly something that we have played around with in folding activities for the students in their courses. Branching scenarios where they work with decision-making trees and things like that in management are a really interesting way of scaffolding their skills ahead of being able to do these types of assessments, yes. Okay, tips for running an interactive oral. The exam does need to be set up well ahead of time. The links and things, and do work that time into the scheduling. So 15 minutes for a 10-minute interactive oral works really well. Factor in some the potential for technical difficulties, as I mentioned, by having some extra sessions at the end of each day if you need it, or perhaps at the before you break for lunch or afterwards. You could, for a 10-minute exam, you might, depending on your connectivity where you are, you might want to schedule them every 15 or every 20 minutes, depending on how you feel about that. And again, the purpose should be so clear. The explanation given to the students on how the session will be run, with the marking rubric, briefing videos and exemplars provided well ahead of time. As Poppy said, you just have to have your whole heart in what you're doing here so that the students feel really confident. Okay, I'm going to move on to marking rubrics now. Are there any, I realise that we've come to the end of our session there for 6 o'clock, but I know that there are a couple of questions, and these slides are not designed really for me to go into any great detail, but I did just want to say to you that I'll put them out there for you so you could see an example of a couple of partial rubrics here where one question is certainly being assessed, the relevance, the logical coherence and the critical innovation there. And different parts of the question, and you can see it's very rich in the text, so that the amount of additional feedback required is quite minimal there. And this is the one criterion only that looks at the expression and flow. And again, that's very clearly worded and really quite rich. Are there any other questions at the point? Ray?
There are a few. A great question from Lorraine on inter-rater reliability with multiple staff conducting these. So I guess that's particularly for large cohorts. And related to that, I think, is Stefan's question around marker training.
Excellent questions. Thank you both. We find actually the provision of the exemplar and the marking on the rubric activity is one of the things we do with our marking with our tutor staff. We actually give them a briefing ahead of the trimester so that they're well across the design before they even go into any of the teaching, because we want them to be referring to this, building on this, offering opportunities in their tutorials all the way through as well. And as those activities come to them in the workshop slides, we want them to truly understand how rich this is in terms of preparation for their assessment. So we take them through the activity of actually marking the primary convener, which elicits a lot of fun, I've got to say, but it also provides great clarification, and that understanding is really positive. And in some instances, you can actually pair your tutors up in that briefing and get them to perhaps ask some questions of each other, so they get a little bit more of an understanding of what's expected there. We don't do a great big long training. I think usually it's sort of 45 minutes to an hour there that we talk about things. We look at other interactive orals. We look at ones that have been covered in other courses. And perhaps consider what goes right, what could go wrong, and what we're really looking for in the richness of the answers there. And then we also recover that again just prior to the assessment. Any other questions there?
Wags mentioned that potential cultural bias. So I think that's come up a few times, and Popi spoke about that as well. Do you cover that in the training? Do you talk about?
Absolutely. And I've got to say, I think I've only had one convener do an interactive oral with me who isn't themselves an international academic working in Australia. And so in all of our instances, our exemplars just about have been provided by academics with thick accents, varying levels of English language skills themselves. And so that's been a very positive experience there. Where that isn't the case, absolutely we talk about that. And again, in the rubric, it's made very clear we're not looking in the flow for their brilliant English skills. We're just looking as to whether or not they can get their argument across, whether they're being innovative, whether they're really thinking about and providing their own opinions and providing their own experiences and recommendations and defense of whatever they happen to be doing there. I saw a question a little bit earlier about the use of the term interactive oral. I just want to reiterate that it is actually a term that's used extensively by the International Baccalaureate. And so when we were looking at what we would call our assessments here in the Griffith Business School, because we knew that we didn't want to use the term viva voce. We knew that they truly weren't a viva voce. They really are exactly what we call them, interactive conversation, interactive oral. We want it to be genuine and unscripted. We looked to the International Baccalaureate because we couldn't find anything really at all about those terms and the word stress in any of our searches. And I thought that we thought that would be a great starting point, and it seems to have caught on. And I think it's important. I've had a number of people, when I've talked about interactive orals, say, oh, you mean a viva voce? And having that conversation about, well, actually, you know what? No, not really. We really, it's not the same thing. It's about having that genuine and unscripted opportunity to sit down and talk to your student. And I think Poppy's probably put this in the chat. There's nothing our academics love more than being able to sit down and see what their students actually know. So what did you learn in my course? And have that conversation and am I really ready? Have I got you at this point, and have I built you up to a certain point, pass you on to the next convener with everything I need you to know? And how are you able to demonstrate that? And the sense of completion, the sense of fulfillment for our academics, the reward that's just in that sort of assessment is so positive there.
Sorry, I'm just going to stick the last couple of slides up because there
Sure,
are people
thanks,
shooting out.
Sure.
But please continue. I'm not going to stop the recording yet because there's lots of interesting questions going on, but I just want to get us through. So there's the Sway link, which is also on the recordings page. The next one is a couple of links there to some resources. Again, these slides are on the resources page, so you'll be able to access the links that are presented there. Would you like to say anything about these resources?
Oh, no, sorry, Matthew, sorry. Oh, you're doing such a good job. I didn't want to interrupt. No, so obviously our link to our papers there. We've provided looking for academics talking about doing this. It's one thing to hear all this from me as a learning and teaching consultant, but I think it's so valuable to hear from our academics themselves as to why they would do these sorts of exams their experiences in that. So I'm so grateful to Popi coming along, and I know that I've had a number of my colleagues in the session tonight. Deborah Griffin as well, who is our Deputy Dean for the Griffith Business School, has been here. And I know that they're sharing their experience of what they know as an academic is very important. And I'm certainly particularly aware in this role that our place is to plant a seed with our academics, make a suggestion on what they could possibly do. But none of these designs happen unless an academic truly feels that this is the right thing for their students and it's the right way to demonstrate their knowledge. And so that's the great privilege of working in learning and teaching consultancy, as I do, to the business school here and educational design, is that we get to plant a lot of seeds and see what grows. And this is one of the seeds that I'm so grateful I planted a long time ago and have had the opportunity to work with so many conveners over the years because it's led to some really remarkable student experiences.
Brilliant, thank you. Again, just before we run off, if people could please kindly fill in our feedback survey, that'll be fantastic. And I will send your comments through to the speakers as well. So it's a learning experience for us all. The next session is on online exam challenges, migration versus transformation. That is on a research focus, I guess, on that case, but there are some practical examples that will come out of that session. So I'd encourage you to come along back to that session as well. In the meantime, continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Matthew. So I'm really keen for some more questions. If you've got some questions, bring them on. And Popi also, I'm sure, will jump on if you have questions for Popi.
Danielle, I think KM mentions in the chat really still wanting to think about how to make this work with a large class. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the time and maybe that example of the course with 400 students?
Absolutely. Okay, so the course with 400 students was actually a first year course. And for many of these students, it was their first semester of study with us. It was an economics course. And because the booking sheet allows us to create times for each tutor, each marker, and they are also the tutors of the various students. What we do is we book, when they're face-to-face, we book multiple offices in the various departments, and the students come in at their given time. There's a little chair sitting outside for them to wait on, and they come in, they do it that way, or in this instance using Collaborate Ultra, we actually create one large session, and the students come in more than 5 minutes beforehand. We're having a little difficulty with Collaborate Ultra in that our students are using Collaborate Ultra currently as a COVID response for their workshop delivery in all their courses, and so we cannot also assess them there because recording the assessment would make it available to the rest of the cohort. So what we've done is we've created a separate organisation site in Blackboard, and we're using that particularly just for the assessment, and students have a web link, a guest link, as much as you have had for this session here, to come into the session, and that's when they meet with the academic. And so there are sessions for every single person, every single marker I should say, and their students receive that unique code there. And that's how we manage it. It's really quite simple. They have their time, they know when to come. The Bookings app actually allows you to send out a confirmation email with a heap of details on it, and also allows you to send out a reminder the day before to the students, reiterating the link or perhaps any changes to a room booking or something that might need to be there. So you're actually able to manage that really well, and it has its own calendar. So if students need to move things around or change things around, the individual tutor has access to that, and they can manage it all themselves, and it's worked incredibly well. How do we handle feedback is through the rubrics. Because the rubric is marked on by every tutor for every student, they actually receive their mark and feedback on that rubric, and it works incredibly well.
There was also a question quite a bit earlier from David around the privacy of around consent of recording.
Absolutely, that's not a problem. So we make that explicit at the beginning, that we actually have an electronic cover sheet that we use that has questions there about the retention of or the use of their assessments for moderation or exemplar purposes, but we make it very clear that all assessments are recorded, much in the same way that all assignments, when they're submitted into an LMS, are retained in the course site. This is the same sort of thing. They're submitting their assessment, albeit synchronously, and that's recorded and kept in the course site then for various purposes, but we wouldn't use it for an exemplar or moderation unless the student's given their consent, and we do have an electronic cover sheet that we use for those purposes.
And Jenny asked a question around the 5 minutes. When you say it's 5 minutes to assess the interactive oral, is it 5 minutes per student in a group assessment?
Okay, so in a group assessment, when I say it's 5 minutes, obviously as the students are responding to their questions, you've got the rubric open on your screen, so you can jot things in, you can have a couple of thoughts there. You want to keep it as genuine and authentic as you can, but it's quite easy to make a few notes as you go, particularly if the student's thinking for a couple of seconds about what they want to say. And then at the end of the session, so for a group, interactive oral, you might allow 30 minutes and it might be a group of 4, but you might then allow some time in between for that marking process, or certainly at the end. But that would be factored into the time that you've allowed for that assessment. So in the 45 minutes per student per trimester model for marking that we have in our Griffith Business School, that is all factored in there to that, for those students and it's divided then between the group of 4 as to what that works out to as a part of their individual 45 minutes. Yes.
Tom's asking about peer assessment, and also earlier Colin made a comment he'd be interested in seeing an independent paper on efficacy and impact of this approach.
Sorry, Ray, could you just repeat that for a second, please?
Sorry. So Tom asked about using this approach for peer assessment, and also earlier Colin mentioned that he'd be keen to see an independent paper, like some research into the efficacy of the approach.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the peer assessment. Now, I'm not sure if the team from Feedback Fruits is still here, but their product certainly will offer us an amazing opportunity there to have peer feedback. And I like it for both formative and summative assessment there, where students will be able to upload videos or participate in activities where they're then able to mark each other and give peer feedback there on rubrics and things. So I think that's a wonderful option there for both formative and summative assessment along the way. And I think peers can genuinely, in the tutor room too, and I think I've done this with a number of conveners, where there are scenarios given to the room and they actually have to essentially think, pair, share with someone else in the room and practice some of these skills as they go along on various aspects. I have a course that I didn't talk about tonight on sport media, or sport information, where students actually, as their final assessment, participate in they have to give a media briefing and then take questions from the media pack. And throughout that particular course, they're given opportunities to have to respond to various situations on the short, medium and long-term impacts of a major incident that's occurred in their sport organisation, and how they would respond to that to the media. So again, that's scaffold, and the peers in a face-to-face setting, the peers give feedback to that. So that's something you could do in breakout rooms, online. That's something that you can certainly do in your online sessions as well. It's a great activity. And the peer assessment, yes, can be a part of their final mark. That's certainly through Feedback Fruits there. That's certainly something that we can do. And also VoiceThread would allow that. And that would also feed through to their marks there. Now, efficacy and independent research. Popi, did you want to take that one?
Yes, I just need to understand the question a little bit. And what they mean by efficacy. If was it Tom? I'm not sure who it was that asked in an independent paper on efficacy or impact on learning outcomes. Okay, I think I understand the question. I could have the wrong take on this, but we have a lot of data that show direct links with the positive impact of using interactive orals to skill development. We had not only data from the surveys that we conducted, but also with the actual results of the students that took interactive orals. So their overall marks increased, and when we had board assessment, for me, it was an interesting situation, because I had to justify why my results, my students' marks did not have a bell. And all of a sudden, my students were performing better than in other courses. And it was a good problem to explain to the board, because I told them how I designed an assessment task where students actually enjoyed doing, and they performed well. So there is impact on the learning and the outcomes. And in response to the question about the evaluations, that was a bonus. That was a real bonus for academics that used interactive orals, because there were really positive evaluations on teaching and course. And for the first time, I had some fives, which was really a happy moment for me, because not only I got good results in my evaluations, but it showed me that the students appreciated all the effort that I put into these, and they enjoyed it. And it came through both in their learning, in the skill development, and in the student evaluations of my teaching and learning. So I hope that answers the question that Colin posed earlier in the session.
Thank you, Poppy. Ray, any other questions there?
Had to click on my I think that has covered a lot. So we've talked about rubrics. Jenny was just clarifying the group interactive oral might be 20 minutes.
Look, a group interactive oral can be as long as you need to assess all the individual students. So the one I was talking about in the hotel management course, it is a full 30 minutes there for the student members, and then there's marking time after that, depending on what the convener needs. As the students are going, they have multiple tabs open with their rubrics for each student, and they're actually able to fill that in as they go, and it is quite efficient. I've not really heard any feedback from my conveners on marking time issues, and I think Poppy was sort of saying that in the chat as well. You take a few notes as you go, you clean it up as you know there's the changeover happening, and the students have always been very positive about the quality feedback they receive. They certainly don't feel like we're not giving them enough there. They do find that because they've understood the rubric so thoroughly all the way through the course, they don't have a problem with it when it comes to being marked on it. There's a question there about the slides on the SWAY site. Yes, right at the very bottom of the SWAY, we have added the slides. They're a PDF there for you. There's a lot of resources, so I look forward to seeing or hearing if anyone has further questions or wants to discuss with their group, or perhaps have a department meeting and there's a group of people that want to hear more, please do reach out to our team. We've spoken to numerous unis all around the world over a number of years now, and are more than happy to explore your particular discipline's requirements for interactive orals. And I particularly personally always like the challenge of coming up with creative assessment designs that are scaffolded and include this option as well.
Awesome. I can't see any additional questions in the chat. So if there's anyone who is still here whose question hasn't been addressed, if you can just add it now in the chat, that'd be good. And Darren's just added, are you offering the rubrics to hotel managers and enabling a portfolio to be built live?
No, Darren. In that particular example, students have had to essentially run the hotel operations for students over an entire semester in groups, and then the rubric is used to mark an interactive oral, which takes the form of a shareholders meeting. That's the scenario where they have to defend the decisions that they've made throughout the semester, and the rubric's used to mark them on that, but it also scaffolds their understanding of what's required for that assessment. I always say a good rubric does three things. It should brief the students thoroughly on what's expected at every level. It should be efficient for marking and feedback and feed forward. And finally, in our instance, it should also allow you to collect data for assurance of learning if required. Sandy's got a question there. Do you have any issues with students not taking the assessment, particularly when it is low stakes weighting? No, we haven't seen that at all. The only low stakes we have is that first year course with that particular convener there, and because it scaffolds the draft of the major written assignment, it's incredibly valuable to the students to take that very seriously, and it's worked really well for retention in that area as well. I can see Max is just in the chat there from Feedback Fruits. If anyone's got any other questions for the crew from Feedback Fruits, they're there. You can click on, there's an email link there. So thank you very much, Max, for coming along. Hopefully everyone's able to consider some options there for their asynchronous designs as well, based on your systems and what you have available to you. Matthew's also asking, please, before you go, fill out the survey. That would be great. We'd appreciate the feedback too. I can see there's still lots of people, so any other questions you have?
No, looks like it's it. Let's just say call it a night, shall we?
Thank you, Matthew. That's great.
Thank you very much, Danielle, Popi, and Ray. It's been brilliant. It's one of the best sessions I've seen in a long time. Very interactive, great discussion, and thankfully the recording's there. So encourage people to come back and have a look at it again. So I'm going to stop the recording, but if you do want to stick around for some last-minute questions, you're welcome to do that.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It's been a real privilege to talk with everyone tonight. It was a lot of fun for our team as well, and hopefully you'll stay in touch. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. Good night.